Hi everyone, and welcome to this Google Digital Garage session on Keep Your Family Safe Online. So my name's Annie and I'm a trainer for the Google Skills digital program, Google Digital Garage, and I've been in digital marketing for most of my career as well as having a business. But more importantly for this session, I'm also a mum. So I understand and value the importance of protecting children online. I'm not alone today. I'm very lucky to be joined by our moderator, Sam. You'll be able to recognise who Sam is by both her name and a blue spanner next to her name there in the chat. So please do engage with us. This session really is valuable when we hear from you and know what matters to you and how we can help. So please do talk to Sam. Now, this is not a standalone session. There's other sessions that we offer at g.co/digital garage at the link just below. And within those, the one that I'd recommend alongside this session the most is Safety First. And this is about keeping yourself protected on the internet as well. So about keeping yourself safe as well as your children. So without further ado, we're going to go through this session today, but just a couple of housekeeping tips before we get started. If you are unable to see or hear me correctly, a quick refresh normally does iron those things out. If you do want to join in the chat, which, as I said, we actively welcome, please do sign into YouTube, and it's quite a quick and easy thing to do, and get involved in the chat. And the more you share, the better it is, because the more we can help each other in this space. So, just to let you know who we've partnered with today, because it's very important to this session, we've partnered with Internet Matters. Now, it seemed like a really natural partnership because they care about looking after the digital welfare of children online. That's their whole mission, to protect and empower parents against the problems that may come around from all the different angles of the digital space. And with Google's deep understanding of the internet, it seemed like a perfect partnership to work in collaboration with Internet Matters. They are a non-for-profit organisation, and they are there simply to empower parents, carers, aunties, uncles, grandmas, teachers, anybody who looks after children to keep them safe in the digital world. So today we're going to educate you on some of the areas of web safety that we can work together with as a family to help your family feel more confident and you to feel happier about being online and your children being safe and secure in the online space. So as mentioned, this session is aimed at everybody. It's not just at parents, it's at anybody who will be looking after a child. So that includes grandparents and carers, aunties, uncles and teachers and everyone besides. So it's three parts to what we're discussing today. And the first is looking at the power of the internet. So we're going to understand the online safety from the aspect of how powerful it is and how quickly it's grown, really, in terms of the areas of concern we might consider now as parents in today's world. And then looking at keeping the children safe, all our children safe online. So we're going to dive there into some specific risks that children might be facing in the digital world and looking at some tips and some ways to combat that through some conversations. And then we're going to try and boost our attitudes to safety by also bringing in some tools and looking at having those positive conversations alongside some tools and open dialogue to help build in those discussions about being safe online. So as you can see, it's going to be a jam-packed session, and I'll kick off now with the introduction to online safety. So the world has changed massively since I was a child. So as a child, the internet did not exist, believe it or not. And that may be the same for you or many of you on this call today, and to many people in the world in general. We didn't all grow up with digital. So that can feel quite a scary thing when it comes to thinking about our children growing up in the digital space. So what we want to do here is to look at the online challenges that we have and explore that landscape together, because that is going to be the way that we can understand best the digital age and how to help our children within it. And we also have to think that whilst we might not have grown up with digital, our children do. So they may never have known a time without the internet. I know that 2-year-olds often now feel more comfortable with using an iPad than perhaps even a magazine. So it's a completely new world, and this is something for us to explore together today and for us as parents to feel more confident about in that exploration process. So let's dive now into understanding that landscape a bit better. So before we go any further, I just want us to use the chat box, if that's okay, and take a minute to write down the following. So what is your biggest concern at the moment? What has brought you to us today in terms of your concerns of your children online? So it'd be great if you can pop something there in the chat so we can talk about that together. There is a delay between what you type and what I see, so I will hold a little bit back to see if you've typed anything in. But for me, I have had a number of concerns with my little one of that being screen time, the amount of time that's spent in front of the screen and whether that's a positive experience. I suppose that's come up for me a number of times. And also the idea of bullying and other aspects that might come out of being online. So what are your concerns of being in the online space? Have a think now and type if you want to. So to help you out and to maybe support your ideas as to what might be concerning you being a more wider issue to everybody. Many parents have concerns about their children online, and the ones on the screen are real quotes. They're from an actual group of parents that were a focus group talking about the specific issues that they were facing and concerned about as regards their children in the online space. So if you have had any of these worries on screen, then don't be worried, you are in good company because this is a very common occurrence that we're having these feelings. So in order to stay engaged, it's a good idea to be a part of your child's world, not just in the normal sense that we are with our children, trying to follow and join their world, but in the digital sense, because the digital world is part of their world now too, a big part of it. So actually following them on social media, even joining those accounts that we might not necessarily be keen on and getting involved is a nice way to start joining in their world, getting engaged and feeling more confident in what they're doing in that world. So for instance, in COVID-19, there was a real rise in TikTok and lots of people started to use that platform. So perhaps you might consider going onto TikTok, especially if you have children in year 6 and above, because that seemed to be the popular age group for joining TikTok at that time. And children now are actually spending more time on YouTube than even on TV. So the weight is falling towards YouTube. So maybe we want to consider that space and being involved in YouTube a little bit more so that we can follow and see what's happening with our children over there. So there's quite a few concerns out there, aren't there? We can see on the screen a number that are coming up already. So in this session, what we want to do is to have a positive approach to how we can tackle that in terms of a dialogue with our children and also some tools to help support us in the process. So as mentioned, online digital world, it is a big part of our children's life. So from very young, they're getting involved in digital and they're using it very frequently. So as you can see, the numbers on screen are high for those using a smartphone to go online. So when we think about that, it's quite strange, isn't it? Because how old were we when we first were interacting with the internet? So for me, social media came into my life as an adult, not as a child. So social media was much, much later. So now social media is publicly shared, isn't it? Or could be, depending on our settings. So we need to think about what we're putting out there on social media as adults, never mind as children. So thinking about, as children, what are they doing with social media as well? And when I first came across technology, as I say, I was that bit older. The first time I actually came across using Google was when I started at university. So it was quite far down the road. So I grew up without any real connection with the internet as a child. So for me, thinking of my child in that space seems quite daunting, and perhaps it's similar for you. And Dr. Linda Papadopoulos says quite often about parents experiencing this kind of fear around their kids because they didn't have the same history as their children. So it's difficult, isn't it? Because we feel that wisdom as parents is what we want to bring to our children. But if we didn't have the digital era as children, it's hard for us to teach in that area. The normal rules don't apply because they are different, because we didn't actually grow up to have that full experience as a child. So it's more difficult for us to know how to navigate that space. And this is why sessions like this hopefully will help dispel those concerns. And that's probably why we feel and have the biggest struggle that we do with the thought of safety online. So And the scale really of the internet and of digital growth is massive. So where the TV took 50 years to fully come about, the internet took a year. And then you look at the adoption rates, for example, on the internet, and the Pokemon game got 45 million users in just a few days. And then Fortnite within 2 years got 250 million users. So as you can see, it's quite an attractive area for children to be involved, and it happens quite quickly and quite phenomenally. So tech, it actually can be such an amazing force for good as well. So we don't really want to stop our children using it. Digital literacy is a new form of literacy, really, and we can do so many things online. We can learn, be educated, we can play, we can socialize, we can interact. And we can learn in a better way than ever before. Those interactive games bring things to life. They breathe life into the content that perhaps in years gone by were not that interesting to us. So it can give us a real feel for a topic or an idea, and we can learn at a touch of a button, so many different subjects. We can also have freedom of expression, so it can really give us a voice, a platform like never before. So where we might be in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere, now we've got a voice to the world. And that can help us. We can be inspired by other people in the world. We can champion causes. We can share ideas. We can be our own influencers to other people. We can influence many people. And so for children, from starting a blog to, for example, following your favorite artists on Instagram, it's a hive of activity and creativity and an opportunity for people to really have creative expression, especially children, and to maybe start very young, aspiring creatives, getting themselves known and perhaps even building businesses, ideas, portfolios, opportunities from very young. So there are so many opportunities that come from having the internet. However, it still is a complex place, isn't it? As mentioned, there is so much to it. And so it was also, it's worth considering, it wasn't built for children in mind. So the internet has been around for about 25 years, but it has not been built with the idea of having children in mind from the beginning. So it's a new terrain in many ways for supporting children in that space. So this is how we are going to look into it in more depth now. So do we know, I just want you to, if you can, pop in the chat. I know you might want to rather watch than chat, and that's fine. But have a think now, and if you can put in the chat, do share. What do you think your children are actually doing online? Do you feel that you have a handle on what's happening there, on what they might be doing? Could they be downloading something? Are they gaming? Do we know if they're connecting? What are the kind of things that we might consider that they're doing online? And how are we currently monitoring them? So these are just reflective questions for us to consider at this stage. How are we monitoring what they're doing and what are they doing? They're a good starting point for us to think about. So do share in the chat if you know those answers to the questions. And how are they using the internet in general today? So they are, as I say, growing up in a very different generation to ever before. And these are some big numbers coming now on the screen. And the use of the internet is so massively prevalent daily. And you can see even in children, 26 times a day, they're posting content. And the average screen time daily is 3 hours and 15 minutes. Now, if you think out of a day, that's quite a chunk of a child's day that they're using in the digital world already. So that's the average. So some might be more. And it's become a fundamental part of our children's lives. It's a huge part. So they might be posting updates, they might be having conversations, they might be connecting, and they might be connecting with people that are not who they think they are. So it's imperative that we start getting into these conversations really quite early on. It's never really too early to start those conversations and coming up with thoughts and ideas around what might happen if they find something online when they're browsing that they're not happy about or that upsets them. So that's something we're going to address today a bit more. So just a stop for questions. And hi, Myra, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, they're watching videos. Yes, they won't be alone. So YouTube is now the second biggest search engine and right behind Google. And a third of all activity online is now consuming video content. So I can fully believe that they're watching videos. So yes, I think that's a big place that people are spending their time on YouTube. So no questions at this point, but remember there are a couple more breaks throughout, so please do use that opportunity to share any questions that you might have as we go on. So how do we keep our children safe in this online world? So we're going to look at the risks. We're going to first address some of those risks that exist out there and the concerns that you might have and the context around those concerns in the online space, and then look at those practical tools and steps that we can take to take them through this new world of digital together. So these are the things that many parents worry about, and you might be able to relate to some of those aspects that are on screen. I know I certainly have already mentioned a couple that I relate to, but all of these are things that would cross my mind, I'm sure, at some point. So for each of these, we're going to share a bit of context so that we can get under the hood of what these things are. And most importantly, think about how do we get that conversation started with our children around these sometimes rather difficult topics for us because we may not have experienced it ourselves. So let's jump in now to the screen time. So screen time, I myself, and you possibly as well, may have had problems with screen time, particularly in the pandemic. We've spent a lot of time living on the screens, but thank goodness it was there. But yes, we could have spent an awful lot of time sitting in front of the screen. And it offers so many opportunities to children at the touch of a button. So it can be very compelling, very interesting, and very helpful to use. But if it's used too much, like anything in life, anything in moderation is okay. But if it's to the extreme, then of course it can have a negative effect on well-being. So we're aware of the pros and the cons in the devices, but now let's look at how we can approach those concerns with it. So the effect of screen time on sleep is something you may or may not be aware of, but if you're having a trouble sleeping yourself, this could be a useful piece of information, but also for your children. So screen time, using it close to bedtime is not really advisable because the blue light wakes up the body and tricks the brain into thinking it's daylight, and it makes it difficult for us to go back to sleep again. So sometimes we might feel that we want to do something when we're bored on our phones in bed, and that could be keeping us up later and later. And similarly with our children as well, perhaps they're on their phones and that may disrupt their sleep. So sleep is so important. We all need that restorative sleep. So considering trying to have a time to switch off for sleep would be possibly a really useful thing as a household to consider. The effect on behaviour. So it can affect behaviour as well. Did you know that on average, it's 150 times that you will glance at your phone in a day? 150 times. That's an awful lot of times to be looking at the phone. But that shows that we are creatures of habit. We find it something almost comforting and needful to be doing all the time, looking at our phone. And that is likely to be also the case for our children. And it can affect brain development because all of this activity, all of this excitement that's going on in the digital space creates arousal. And so this entertainment-based system creating arousal can amplify anxiety. So it can actually create anxiety problems. So what is happening on the end of that as well is millennials are now being more forgetful than OAPs. And this is because they're outsourcing their brains to the internet, to maps to take them somewhere, to the calendar to organize their lives. And Columbia University found that when people didn't need to take all the information in, they didn't need to restore it and remember it because it was easily there at the touch of a button, they were less likely to form a memory and an imprint of it in their own minds. So now we know the problem, don't we? We're outsourcing our brains. So what can we do proactively to deal with this? So you probably came across a lot of screen time accelerated issues during COVID. we all spent a lot of time on there, and we could see the value probably in having those screens and those opportunities of technology during that time. We did everything from schooling, and if you did do schooling, I take my hat off to you because it's not an easy thing to do. Socializing, exercising. I remember Joe Wicks and others besides. Peppa Pig workouts were the rage in our home anyway. And entertainment, all shift to online. So not all screen time, however, is created equal. So using that in a useful way, in an effective way, in a balanced diet like we would with our own food is a way to encourage the best use of screen time. So if that screen time's being used to encourage creativity, to develop connections with family and friends, to advance our learning, then the internet has a purpose for us. But if we find ourselves just scrolling and scrolling on something that isn't actually useful to us in one of those areas, then perhaps it's not going to benefit us in the longer term. So the most important thing to begin with is knowing that not all screen time is equal. And if we're doing homework, if we're FaceTiming a teacher, as we probably did in COVID, or might still do if it's continued for some people, we need to get that healthy balance to know that, yes, we can use it for the homework, we can use it for the study, but at what times of the day we might do that. But ensure also that we're being safe. So setting up those controls for safety is important, and we're going to look a bit more on that in a moment. And just making sure we've got that family harmony, because how often do you find yourself looking down and not looking up at the people in front of you? So some people say we've never been so connected, yet so alone. So it's about remembering that it's a balance. We don't want to just be online. We also want to be offline. And I'm saying we because as parents, it's nice for us to lead by example and start first and encourage our children to do the same, because it can become immersed in another world, in a digital world, away from the family world. So we'll talk more about that in a bit more detail in a moment. So I don't know if you've heard of Google Family Link, but this is a really useful tool for you to take away, hopefully, from this session if you haven't today, because this is going to help balance that screen time that we're talking about here. It can do a number of things, such as temporarily locking your child's device at set times. So we were talking about perhaps we want a bit more family time, or we want some downtime. So maybe during the dinner time or the sleep time, we could create some time slots where we lock the phone, and we can do that with Family Link. So using that helps us to ensure that the child gets the right balance of time on the digital space that we want them to have. So, you know, there may be that they're watching something on YouTube, they may be learning something, but we'll say, okay, at dinner time, all devices off, for example, and then we can take that time out in Family Link to ensure it happens. And yes, it's a very useful tool for us to also see what apps they might be buying and trying to get, and we can check the safety level of those apps as well, so we can monitor and look after what is being purchased online as well. So it's got a number of various useful tools, but particularly when it comes to screen time, it helps us to block out certain time zones for us to have the devices shut down, which I think is useful for screen time. Another useful app, which is really beautiful, is Forest app. So this is more like a game-like approach, and children love games, don't they, in the main? So this is where they start to manage their screen time by growing trees and forests. So they can build more forests the longer they stay off their devices. So it's about focusing your time when you're using this Forest app on being mindful and useful in the time you do spend in digital. So it's not wasted time, so it's productive. So it's incredibly helpful when we're looking at building the right behaviours in that space, and looking at some tips now to help that process in terms of building useful, focused time. So we'll look at a few more tips to do that now. So I mentioned before, it's so important to look at being a role model first. And not all activities are equal. So some are equals, some activities we might want them to spend a bit more time on. It might be the education side, the homework side, the gaming that's in line with that. And we might want to give them less time in terms of the entertainment side on a school day, for example. So it's about thinking about what we want in terms of within our home and the activities that are going to suit us as a household. But whatever behaviour we want to drive with our children, we do need to model it first. So if we're saying, get off your phone at tea time, it's best if we're probably not on our phones at that time, because we need to set that example. And encourage them to take up alternative activities. You probably remember playing on the street. I certainly do. I would run down the street, knock on people's doors, and we wouldn't be doing that so much today, unfortunately. But those kind of get outside activities are still available to us. So perhaps we could factor in some time for going for a walk, or going exploring, or playing a game away from the internet, so that we do something a bit different as a family together and have that connection outside of the digital space as well as inside it. But just maybe have that communal agreement that we're going to unplug and play together at this particular time of the day. I think that's a really nice routine to keep up and to have as a family. But maybe we can agree an appropriate length of time and have a reward as a family as well, if we do stick to our guns, because it will be a group agreement, if you like. So although, you know, we are trying to manage this space because it's very exciting and there's a lot going on, if we can get the recipe right and get really the children to understand the balance of what's important and how best to use it, I think that's the essential message here in helping screen time be useful for us all. The next thing that sometimes children may stumble across is inappropriate content. And this can happen via a number of methods. For example, some friends sharing a link from phone to phone. It can happen on multiple internet connected devices. It can go through Bluetooth, AirDrop. So there's so many ways that inappropriate content can be shared through, for example, chatting to others that we're not familiar with online, even though we think they might be familiar. So lots of things can come about in terms of getting that, stumbling upon that unsuitable content. So with that in mind, it's being aware of it, and that there are different types of inappropriate content out there, but the exposure and the reaction to it will depend very much on your children's age, their maturity level, and also just being aware of it helps you to have that conversation with them so that they, when they do feel uncomfortable, they know to come and talk to you about it. I mean, it can be difficult to monitor because, as mentioned, there's so many internet connected devices. They could be across all those different types. So try and keep that conversation flow going so that if anything does come up, they can share that with you from as early as possible, never too young to really start. So some tips to start that. So first of all, that family agreement that we keep coming back to is such a nice and important starting place for talking about empowering ourselves in the digital world and keeping them safe in that space. So as we would talk about boundaries in the usual sense, we can also bring about conversations to doing that in the digital space as well. So it's nice to give children strategies to cope with that. So for example, I mentioned earlier, if they saw something that was inappropriate, that they didn't like, you might ask them to switch it down immediately and to come and tell you or another person that they trust in the area they're in. So perhaps it might be a teacher, it might be a friend, it might be a parent, whoever's nearest at the time. But getting them to open up that dialogue and quickly remedy the situation by removing it, removing that web page immediately. And as soon as I say, as soon as they do start to use the internet, and some children start very young, start having those conversations as soon as you can about what they might find there. And, you know, regularly talk about it and let them know that things might come up that they might be upset about, and tell them to come and talk to you about it. So I know there was an advert on one of the music apps that I was listening to, and it was talking about winning a holiday or something, and banner ads and all this sort of things. And I remember my daughter asking me, what's a banner ad and how does it work? And I explained that they're probably something that, you know, is, if they're telling you something too good to be true, then we just shut it down. So, you know, if it's saying for no good reason you've won a holiday to Disneyland, probably that's not going to be true. It's not going to happen. So having that conversation early on and discussing it with your children is a nice thing to start with. And yeah, having that think before you click approach. So those conversations about, you know, if it does look too good to be true, it probably is going to help them think about maybe not pressing on it. But also there are settings that you can use to help stop those pop-ups coming up to protect you from that kind of behaviour on your children's devices. And if they are very young, because as I say, children are starting young on these devices, we might want to supervise more directly and be in the room with them as they're on those devices to see what is happening so that we're aware and we can keep that conversation flowing. I mentioned settings. So settings are an important thing, and there are lots of different tools available, for example, on smartphones that we might want to look at and get set up to help protect our children in that space. I mean, long gone are the days where we've got one centralized control system for parents. It was just one family PC. Now we have lots of different internet connected devices. And as mentioned, children are getting a phone actually from age 8, as young as 8. So we need to be clear, what can we do to protect them on those devices? So let's start with the devices then. If we do have a phone, there's often a manual that comes with that phone, and within that there should be step-by-step installation parent guides. So have a look at that. If you've lost the guide and it's been a while since you got the phone, often on YouTube you can find that kind of information that will take you through those step-by-steps, or contact the manufacturer directly and find out how you can use those settings to protect your child. And remember, the different smartphone manufacturers have different features as well. They all have different ones built in, and I believe that there's a screen time feature on one of the Apple's newer phones that helps you see what your children are doing online. So have a look at the kind of phones that are out there that give you those kind of opportunities as well. So if you're getting parental control coverage installed on your family devices and it starts to seem a bit too difficult because it just feels like there's so many devices out there to take control of, do consider going through some features as well with your broadband providers. So these are some of the well-known broadband providers that are out there. And you can normally set from a broadband level, go to settings, and you can set to different levels for different devices, the kind of access that is available there as well. Another tool that comes inbuilt, automatically is Google Safe Search. Now, this is something that is useful to use, and if you've got the family link, you can enable you will have it automatically enabled, but you can be the only one who disables it. So it's very handy to have. It's really aimed at the under 12s because as they get older, they get more curious and they find their way through unblocking these kind of things that were stopping them having that safe search before. But for the young children, it can add a lot of value. And of course, there's nothing that is completely flawless, but it's a nice starting point for keeping them safe. So it blocks basically unsuitable imagery for children. And on YouTube, we now have YouTube Kids, which has been made for children in mind, which we'll look at in a moment. But again, no flawless system, but used alongside other parental controls can be really useful for us. So as the children do get older, as I say, it might get more difficult, but we can look at our web browsers. So for example, Google Chrome has a free web browser, and in there you can set supervised levels and manager levels for those kind of controls. So it's worth looking at and seeing if that can be of value to you as well. And so we've picked up a few small tools that we want to share with you here, but we'll just have a quick recap of those. So I mentioned very briefly YouTube Kids. So YouTube Kids has been built towards children. So as I say, the internet wasn't originally built with children in mind. It wasn't built for them. So YouTube Kids has been a new tool that has been specifically created for children, with curated content, parental controls and filtering specifically to try and make it the world for children on YouTube. So it's the first Google product actually built from scratch with kids in mind. So it offers a more contained YouTube experience. And as we know, so many people are watching those videos like Myra, your children will be doing. So it's a nice place for you to go and use for the children to have a particular amount of safety in that space. And as I say, it's made by YouTube creators, particularly aimed at helping appropriate content and useful content for children. So do have a look at that. And a quick recap again on those tools that we've just been mentioning. So smartphone, again, those boundaries that we want to set are really important. So having those conversations that we would normally have around boundaries and including the tech side, the digital side within that. And whether it's mobile, it could be a laptop, it could be a console. They can come in many different ways, these internet connected devices. We need to look at the settings for each of those and make an agreement for them as well. And if we've got internet service providers, which many of us will have, of course, using digital, then we need to look at what our broadband service providers have in terms of settings so that we can block all that adult material out, so that they don't see what we don't want them to see, as far as possible. And that's safe search. So remember that services like Facebook, YouTube, really, it is set at age minimum 13 for a reason. So don't bow to the pressure. I know children, and my niece in particular, would like to be on these sort of platforms ahead of time, but we shouldn't feel bowed to the pressure of it. And perhaps we can connect with all of the parents around our children and have those conversations about setting, when they start on those platforms. Perhaps that agreement and consensus could come in handy if that's possible as well. So these are tools, there are tools there to provide the safety online and those privacy settings and protective settings. But what we need to look at next is cyberbullying, which was something that was never around in the digital format before, but was always around in the real world. So bullying is not a new concept, but the idea of being in the cyberbullying age is very different in many ways to what we grew up with. So we used to be able to leave bullying at the school gate. Now it can sadly follow us home in the internet periods. So the internet and social media have changed the experience of bullying for children of today. So it's completely altered in the digital world, and it encourages more children to social media and anonymous messaging apps. So people start sharing different experiences, and it can create problems in relationships, and especially in the world of the internet, it continues ongoing. And it is difficult but it is different from that traditional sense, because you take it home, it carries on throughout the evening on the computers, etc. So it's often an extension of the face-to-face. It doesn't happen in isolation. So perhaps it just highlights what is happening in the face-to-face world that we might not have known about. So it's often an extension of that, but it is a new form of bullying in the sense that it can extend into the online space. So that's why it's good to try and keep them off the social media until a certain age as well. So young people, though, could be bullied anytime, anywhere, even when they're at home now. So it's useful for us to consider that and to have those conversations with our children. So the kind of things we want to look out for. So the amount of time spent online, we looked earlier at 26 posts on average being posted a day on social media. Obviously, the more that is posted, the more risk of having a negative experience at some point throughout the internet. And over half of this cyberbullying comes from people known to the victim. So it is about finding more out about that experience as well. So it's important for us to have that conversation around it as well. So there's different kinds of bullying, and some of the forms of bullying are here on screen. So it might be useful for us to just understand the terminology so that we can have those discussions or that understanding when we're talking to our children about what's happening in the world. So harassment, this is where they're targeting an individual or even a group with persistent offensive messages, and it could lead to actual cyber stalking where they follow them around on the internet and continue to share unwanted messages. Outing, so this is where publicly they share personal messages, things that did not want to be shared, or videos or something embarrassing about someone online. So putting things out there that somebody did not want to be in the digital world. So that's outing and embarrassing people. Trolling, so this is where they're being deliberate, provocative, insulting messages. It might be misogyny, it might be racism, whatever the topic, it's sensitive and it's something that is unwanted. Catfishing, so this is where somebody steals someone's profile and pretends to be someone else. So it's not actually the real person that they're portraying themselves to be. It's another person altogether. So they're making up fake profiles, often to try and create online relationships. Roasting, so this is actually ganging up on individuals to send offensive and abusive messages until the victim actually cracks. And then griefing, which is abusing and angering people through online gaming. So these are the terminologies that are out there, and they're not nice, but they're useful for us to know. We need to understand these terminologies and what is happening so that we're aware when we're having these conversations with our children. So if your child is affected by cyberbullying, there are lots of places to go for help and advice. So here's just a few do's and don'ts around that. So if you become aware that your child is becoming cyberbullied, some of the things you should aim to do is to find out why. So this is, again, opening up that dialogue, try and establish where this is coming from and the facts surrounding it. So having that discussion around what is actually taking place, and making sure the door's open on that topic. Talk it through. Talk about the blurred lines between uploading and sharing content, because we might think something's funny or get lots of likes, but it might be provoking, offending, hurting another person without us being aware of that. So talking about the blurred lines that exist in that space, and teach by example. So obviously, again, we model positive behaviours as parents. So in praising our children's behaviour in that space and doing a good job in that space is going to encourage more of the same. And learn from it, obviously helping them to learn about what's happened, to take that on board, and to find out together about that space and how you can do things differently as a parent, as a family, as a group together, because you're in it as a team. But this is the hard bit, but try not to get upset, because it might not help your child discussing and opening up that dialogue and sharing with you. And as adults, we have lots of emotions, but we want to try and keep those under wraps as far as possible, so that communication flow continues, and so that the child can feel, or the children can feel, that they can come to us with that concern. And don't ignore it. So obviously, we're not going to just turn a blind eye to it. And of course, we wouldn't as parents. So taking that situation seriously, but trying not to blame someone else about it. So just being aware of what's happening and taking it in a serious way. And don't condone it. So if you find that your child might be a part of that bullying without even realizing that bullying process, or they want to retaliate because they are being bullied, try and let them know that two wrongs do not make a right, because that can just accelerate and domino the experience to make it worse and worse. And another don't that is advised by the Internet Matters is don't take away their devices. The reason being is that could make the situation worse, because they may crave the device, and then when they get it back, they may be worse, or they may find other ways to get online. It's one of those natural instincts in us that if something feels forbidden, we want it more. So it might be useful to keep away from doing that. So it's important to mention that nobody likes to think about your child. I certainly don't like to think about my child in any of these situations. But we want to just think about, are they also contributing without even realizing to these experiences, and also what actions can we take and what is happening in the background too. Online grooming. So this is known as, it's a term that's used for grooming, befriending children basically in order to take advantage of them for sexual purposes. So this can be particularly difficult and a tricky area to talk to our children about. So let's try and look at some things to look out for in that space. So as mentioned, people create fake profiles, they do catfishing, and it's very easy for someone to pretend to be someone else altogether in the internet world behind a screen. So sometimes children might have a conversation thinking that they know somebody, or they feel connected to that person, and they don't have they're not sharing their real identity. So it can be difficult for us as parents to understand the online grooming when it happens, because children are at home, potentially when it happens, and they might be warned by the groomer not to specifically talk about it to a parent. So being aware of this will help us to consider how we approach the conversations. And online groomers are not always strangers either. So in many situations, we may have already met them through family, through friends, and through social activities, in fact. And we use the internet to build that rapport with them. So sometimes the children don't even think they're being groomed. They think they've got a boyfriend. They think they've got a girlfriend. So they've got that trust in this person that isn't a genuine person. So being aware of that as well. And it does depend, as mentioned before, on your child's age, maturity, as to what will offend them in this space and the content that they see. So we need to consider basically what to look out for and to have those conversations about it. So grooming. Grooming can be a tricky subject for us to talk about. I certainly find it not the easiest topic to have a conversation about. So if you do feel uncomfortable doing this, a good way to do it is through storytelling. We all grew up with stories. We all had them read to us. It's something we trust. It's something comforting. It's something we share together. So if, for example, you could talk about someone having something familiar or similar happening, a friend or something, that can sometimes open up the dialogue through storytelling. And some best practice tips are talk about the risk. Actually say that not everybody online is who you think you are, who you think they are. So thinking that, this storytelling approach again, that so-and-so says they've got a boyfriend online and he says these things and actually he's not, whatever is appropriate to the conversation, to the situation you're in. That storytelling takes you and them out of the situation into a third party and makes it easier to share those thoughts and those concerns. And agree the rules. So make sure that your child knows never to share personal information or imagery or anything about themselves with people that they're talking to online, and particularly never ever share a picture of their body online, and never meet up with the people that they meet online, because they will trust what you say. And if they are thinking that these things are normal, until we have the conversations, they might not realize that it's an issue. Stay engaged. So from time to time, we might want to review their social media accounts. I think, like I said earlier, if we are not on those accounts, we can feel more nervous about them, more worried about what those accounts are and what they mean. But if we follow them, if we don't want to follow them, maybe a family member or a friend follow them and just see what's happening in that space, we'll have more of a guide as to what is happening. And then we can watch and observe. I would recommend not taking part in their comments and sharing on social media, but just watching and seeing what's happening there and kind of just being an observer in the background. So many of you may have a firm grip of what your children are doing online, but here are some examples of what we might want to consider if they are doing things online. Updating our privacy settings. So the best way to deal with grooming is obviously to prevent it happening by having that well-informed conversation with your child, but also having those settings, those privacy settings in there on the social networks, and knowing that they can talk to you if they feel unsafe or worried. Perhaps there's a time where you were reading at night in bed, and that feels like a comfortable time to have those conversations and regularly check in with them on what's happening if you're feeling that they're unsafe or they're worried. I've got a worry monster next to my bed, and it's got a baby worry monster next to it, and myself and my daughter, we post our worries in there and we write them down. So that's quite a nice way of starting our conversation. But again, storytelling's another one as well. So the minimum age, as I mentioned, is 13 to be on these social networks. So be aware that if they are on that before that time, it can be more difficult to deal with the things that they might be coming across. If you do find that you have any concerns about your child or someone else's child, there are a number of different avenues that you can go to have support with that. And the CEOP is the police service for checking indecent images and sexual abuse that's happening online, and making sure that that's being dealt with. So that is somewhere to go if you have any concerns, or your child has any concerns about what they're seeing and experiencing in the online world. Childline is another well-known service that we can go to and we can use if they're wanting to get support. And then there's the Internet Watch Foundation, and this is where they, for the last 20 odd years, have spent their time removing and policing basically the content that is on the internet and making sure it's taken down if it's indecent and inappropriate when it comes to children. So these are the different avenues that you can go down for extra support in that area. The next thing for us to consider is privacy and identity fraud. So it isn't just adults where our identity can be stolen. I mentioned that we have another course, which is about safety, protecting our own safety online. Well, this one is considering the children's side of it. And just like adults, their information can be taken. And so we want to maintain our child's privacy as much as we can online, and also look at those default privacy settings for the devices that they're using. So let's have a look at what we can be looking out for. So it can be many years later that we find out that our child's identity has been used and taken, and sometimes it can be used as a feature of blackmail or grooming or bullying later on. So if you do suspect their identity has been taken, there's a few things that might alert you to that thinking of what might have happened. So for example, if you're getting a bill from something that they haven't ordered, for example, or if you're getting emails from an organisation that they don't recognise, or they've received government letters. So it's great to build up that relationship with your child, as mentioned earlier, so that if they do share too much online, they know to come to you. So the first thing we want to do to kind of try and keep this under wraps as much as possible is looking at our privacy settings. So we can go to those networking sites in particular for the children and agree with them what they're sharing and with who, and set those settings in place so that it can be in a contained environment and other people aren't getting wind of the content. And check their device settings. So making sure that on that tablet, on their phone, that it's set so that only certain things are shared. So you might want to look at things such as location services. You might want to look at photos, calendars, Bluetooth, microphone. Have a look at all those settings and decide what you feel is appropriate to be shared and not shared, and have that agreement with your child and talk about why. And find out what is already out there about your child. Have you ever Googled their name and seen what comes up? So there might be information in the public domain already that you want to find out about. So do a quick Google search on their name and see if anything is already out there. And then take action. So you can go and check the websites if they've got any information about your child and ask them to remove any information they've got. And when using a public computer, try and teach your children to go incognito so that that information is not stored. So if you do find your child has had the identity stolen, make sure that you do contact those appropriate companies where it's come from and have a conversation. So I'm just pausing for questions now. It looks like Myra's sent one in. Thank you, Myra. Are there any ways to have control over ads? I think these are actually very disturbing. Sometimes, no matter what parental control settings are in place, sometimes. I understand what you're saying there, Myra. Well, there is more and more legislation around ads and what is shown and what is allowed to be shown and what pops up, for example. But there are those settings where we can stop the pop-ups from coming. So it will be worth having a look into that and maybe going onto a YouTube video and looking at how you can set those settings up if you haven't taken it all in from today. But you can watch back this session for up to 24 hours as well. So if there's any settings within there, do take a look. But yes, having parental control settings is not a flawless situation, but it certainly helps to reduce concerns and to break it down as far as possible. So yeah, I agree. Certain ads can pop up that we don't want the children to be seeing. So try and get those privacy settings in place. I hope that helps, Myra, and thank you for your question. Do keep more of them coming. So the final part of the session today is all about our conversations with our children and about building that digital resilience in our children so that they feel empowered and comfortable in that space, and we can feel that we're taking that responsibility as a parent, but we're feeling confident that things are going well in that space. So, and it's said to be good enough parenting. That's the key to teaching digital resilience, because we can, as long as we're consistent, do our best. That's all we can do as parents in the world in general. But accepting as parents, perfect, it really is impossible. I know for a fact it's not possible. So here are some tips about how we can build up a positive conversation and dialogue with our child with what they do online. So first of all, we want to think about talking early and often. Like I mentioned, we don't want to bury our heads in the sand. We did grow up perhaps in a different generation that didn't have these tools and internet as we grew up, and so it can seem a bit daunting. But let's not ignore that it now exists, and also those platforms that seem very much unlike the kind of thing we want to be on, Snapchat, TikTok. Maybe it's worth us getting involved in those so that we can enter their world and explore it, share it, and discuss it together. And so, yeah, experts do recommend that we become digital mums and digital dads and navigate that online world together, because it is part of their world. It isn't, just a tool. It is part of their world now. So actually understanding and maintaining a dialogue around that part of their world is quite an important and useful thing for us to do as parents. So there's just 4 tips we're going to look at now for building that conversation in the online security space. So first of all, help teach our child to be inquisitive. That natural inquisition and helping them challenge what they see online is going to be a useful tool for us in this space. So let them know they can always speak openly, honestly. We'll do the same with them, and freely about these conversations, and keep well versed as much as you can in that space in terms of confidence around technology and keeping in control, so that you can feel on top of what they're doing. And then these 5 points are what we want to look at in terms of a 5-point plan for us as parents going forward. So first of all is understanding those risks, but risks do not necessarily mean harm, and keeping the risks in proportion. The UK is still the safest place to be online. And communicate regularly, consistently, keep that conversation flowing as we would with most topics as parents, and putting that family agreement, those tools and settings as a cohesion all together on that agreement. We've all signed into it together as well. And then as your child starts to develop those coping strategies, help them to foster that resilience in that space so that they know and feel confident with what they're doing in that world as well. Some different additional resources that can help you with that. So we've looked at CEOP already, which is the policing of the abuse, sexual abuse online in particular. Family Link, we mentioned before. So Family Link is where we can keep control of the screen time and also the apps that they might be purchasing and the level of apps, the maturity of apps they might be trying to get involved in. Internet Legends is a great tool that we'll talk about in a bit more depth in a moment, but Internet Legends is appealing to that child or those children that enjoy the gaming world and bringing things to life in that space, and they can learn about how to be internet legends and keep themselves safe online. Childline, we mentioned before, is a dedicated contact line for your children to speak at any time. Then we've got the Internet Watch Foundation, again, been around for nearly as long as the internet, which is all about trying to remove, or focused on, their mission is getting all the negative and inappropriate content of children removed from the internet. And then Internet Matters, our partner in today's session, which is the non-for-profit organisation whose mission is to empower parents to be educated and support their children around any concerns in the digital space, so that we can do it all as a team together, as a family in the world of digital. So Be Internet Legends is something that is run often through schools, and it starts at the age of around 7 years old. And it's based on these pillars that you can see on screen. So it's all about online presence, online safety for your children, and being respectful to others. So the 5 pillars are: be internet sharp. So this is where we have to think first before we share. So really take stock on what we're putting out there. Remember that 26 times a day is the average of what a child might share. So thinking about, what are the consequences of sharing certain types of information, maybe having those kind of quizzes or conversations with our children to see if they understand what is useful and what is smart to share online. But with this tool, Internet Legends, it helps them to do that as well. Being internet alert, so checking if it's real. So the internet legends will help them to understand who scammers are and the difference between what's real and what's not in the digital space through this gamified experience. So it's very interesting for children to get immersed in that as well and to learn from it. Be internet secure. So it's about protecting your stuff. So again, that's the protection and security around keeping their own identity safe and what to do and what not to do, what to say, what to share, and that sort of thing. And then about the kindness on the internet, keeping up that kindness, being respectful to one another in that space. And then brave, show that bravery if we're concerned about something, to speak up about it. So Internet Legends is a great tool to help them practice these skills, and Interland is an adventure packed game online where they can start to use exactly these sorts of questions, these sorts of ideas to explore internet safety in that land and become interactive and fun, just like the internet is itself, interactive and fun. So that's where they'll find internauts, so not astronauts, internauts, where they combat badly behaved people in like fishers, oversharers, bullies, and by practicing these skills, they'll learn how to be confident online explorers. So it's quite an exciting tool for children to use. And the last thing to share is something called Parent Zone. There's something that is shared in nurseries, but they've set up resources and posters to make awareness around these sorts of games and about internet safety in general. So just coming to the end now for questions. No more questions, but thank you so much for coming today. And I hope you've all enjoyed the session and you've taken something away from you that's given you a bit more confidence around your children in the online world. So your next steps are, I definitely sign up to the program on your own personal safety and privacy online. And that's at g.co/digital garage. And do watch this back because there's a lot of information. As I say, it will be online for 24 hours. And do share with other people that you think it will be of value to. This is a really important session for all families, carers alike. And a final thank you, because I know attention span is difficult. We've got a short one and you've made it to the end if you're here now. So thank you for your time and thank you for coming. Oh, and Fulfilled Lives. Oh, it's nice to see you again. We've been chatting in other sessions. So thank you for coming back, and thank you, Myra, and to anyone else who has been here today. I've been Annie, your trainer for the evening. I wish you a very good evening and I wish you a safe time online. Many thanks.